Hi, my name's Dave Bessell and this is the fourth in a series of analog synth tutorials brought to you by the BA Music course at Plymouth University. For this tutorial we're going to be using the Macbeth M5N, which is a semi-modular synth. The modules are already connected and so it just makes it a bit easier to understand what's going on. The architecture that we're going to be using is the standard 3 oscillators into a filter and 2 envelopes, one for the filter, one for amplitude, so nothing terribly unusual there. One of the good things about these kind of synths is that you can quite often come across sounds that you weren't intending to patch, and sometimes this is a good spur to creativity. So this tutorial is concerned with setting the machine up so that you're likely to get interesting sounds and try and remove a little bit of the trial and error. In other words, to try and improve your hit rate with getting good sounds, or at least interesting ones. So we're going to use this oscillator set to a square wave. We're going to modulate this oscillator with this oscillator set to a sine wave. This is the amount of modulation, so there's quite a gentle amount of modulation, so frequency modulation this is. And then we're going to mix it with this oscillator working in a conventional manner just with a sawtooth. So let's just hear what this oscillator sounds like being modulated by this one. Now the key thing about this technique is that this oscillator is not tracking the keyboard 100%. If this slider was at the top there, it would follow the keyboard and the notes would be in tune. But actually this oscillator is only partially tracking the keyboard, and so when it's modulating this one you get different sounds in different parts of the keyboard, and this is part of the technique for discovering new sounds. So if I let you listen to this oscillator on its own, you'll hear that it's tracking the keyboard but not producing the normal scale. If you listen to this oscillator, which is being modulated by on its own, you get something which is recognizable if you played about with frequency modulation. However, if you only use a small amount of that and mix it with an ordinary sawtooth wave, you begin to get something quite interesting in the top part of the keyboard. In the lower part of the keyboard, you get something completely different. In this case, not terribly usual. So the trick is to set this oscillator so it's not tracking the keyboard completely, and then search across the keyboard for the areas that sound interesting. By varying the amount that this tracks the keyboard and the amount of modulation applied to this, you get a whole family of sounds, and with a little bit of experimentation with those two controls, you can come across things which are really quite unexpected and generally have a lot more complexity than the usual filtered sawtooth waves or pulse width modulated square waves or the usual kind of things that you get from these machines. So I'm just going to give a few examples of the kind of sounds that can be made with this, skipping out the process of trial and error, just to give you an idea of the variety of sounds and the interesting character that this imparts to the sounds. So we have the same setup as we had before. This time the modulating oscillator is tracking the keyboard a lot more than it was previously, but still not perfectly, so it's still out of tune if you like. There's quite a bit more modulation being applied to this oscillator, and this oscillator is being mixed in almost equal proportions to the one that's having the modulation applied to it. For this one I'm using quite a lot of effects on it because, well, just because I can and I like it, but it brings out the character of this sound, and so this is what it sounds like. Okay, here's another example of the same sort of approach. Different amount of keyboard tracking, different waveform, different amount of modulation, just a little bit of LFO added to one of the oscillators, and a bit of real-time filter control. And finally, one more example. Again, the only things that have changed are the amount that this oscillator is tracking the keyboard and the amount of modulation, frequency modulation being applied to this oscillator, a bit of minor tweaking of the envelopes. Now, this is an interesting example because this sound is quite different in different parts of the keyboard. It demonstrates the value of a long keyboard, and well, you'll hear what I mean. At the bass end, it sounds like this. Whereas at the top end, it's completely different, but equally interesting. Almost any setting of the oscillator tracking and the modulation is likely to produce interesting things. It really doesn't take that long to find a host of sounds that have a lot of strange resonance to them, but have an interesting character as a result.